Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for being with us. I'm Will Dupree coming to you from the KXAN Live studio. We appreciate you joining us. And as you can see, there's a live picture next to me of Air Force One coming in for a landing at Austin Bergstrom International Airport. President Biden is coming here to Austin to deliver a speech at the LBJ Presidential Library and Museum. This is an event commemorating 60 years of the Civil Rights Act being signed into law by President Lyndon B. Johnson. Joining me here in the studio to continue our coverage this afternoon as we embark on this a little bit of a reporting journey for all of us is my fellow digital anchor here at KXAN, Esmeralda Zamora. Esme, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate that too.
Thank you so much, Will, and hello to everybody. Thank you for joining us today as we observe this landing coming into the Austin Bergstrom Airport.
Yeah, as you just mentioned there, Esme was talking about Air Force One coming in for a landing at Austin Bergstrom International Airport. Esme, let's remind people about why President Biden is coming to Austin. This was a trip that he initially booked here to the city, but had to reschedule for another historic event. But remind us about that.
Yes, so he is going to be here to speak about the Civil Rights Act of 1964. This is a landmark piece of legislation. It prohibited discrimination and segregation in many areas of American life, and those areas include employment, public accommodations, voting rights, housing, and federally funded programs. It also created a commission on civil rights, established a civil rights division within the Department of Justice, and it also provided a jury trials in cases of criminal civil rights violations.
As you just saw, Air Force One has now landed there in the tarmac at Austin Bergstrom International Airport. This is where President Biden's going to get off the plane here in a few moments, take his motorcade through the city to make it down to the LBJ Presidential Library and Museum on the UT campus. He again is set to speak about the 60-year anniversary of the signing of the Civil Rights Act. And just to remind everybody, this is his first public appearance since announcing that he would end his presidential campaign. He did that only a week and a day ago. It almost feels like a decade at this point after the amount of news that's happened at this point. But this speech was initially supposed to happen on the first day of the Republican National Convention. And that did not happen after all because it was just a day following the attempted assassination of former President Trump. Because of that, President Biden decided not to come here to Austin to deliver that speech commemorating 60 years of this landmark law, and instead he's rescheduled it to today. So we'll just see in just a few moments when Air Force One pulls up in front of the area where reporters are gathered. We expect there will be a few local leaders gathering there too to welcome him into the community. We see this time and time again when these kinds of visits happen. But just to reset for everybody, I'm Will Dupree here in the KXAN Live studio, joined by my fellow digital anchor, Esmeralda Zamora. Esme, talk about, this is a pretty monumental thing, and people can expect lots of traffic, road closures, that kind of thing, because of the president's motorcade getting from the airport to downtown.
Yes, well, as you mentioned, he is getting to downtown, making his way to the LBJ Library, and TxDOT even announced that you should expect a lot of road closures along the major highways that lead to the downtown area. Now, we don't know which route Biden is taking, so we don't know exactly which roads are going to be closed, but just keep in mind if you happen to be driving or making your way into downtown or from downtown, just keep in mind that these closures are a possibility and probably will be in the way there throughout your commute, so just plan accordingly.
I was looking at Twitter a little bit ago as well. One of our colleagues here at KXAN, Grace Reeder, was tweeting out a picture of I-35 northbound into downtown Austin, and it was completely shut down, so there was no traffic moving by. And anybody who lives here in Austin knows that I-35 is the busiest place in the world, usually at any point during the day. So to see that site, it's just because they're shutting down traffic so that the president's motorcade can get down from the Austin airport to the LBJ Presidential Library and Museum. What I'll let you all know as well is that as soon as President Biden gets off Air Force One, that we can see his taxiing to the point where he'll deplane and then get into his motorcade. We will also be carrying the full event from the LBJ Presidential Library all of the remarks that are going to be happening there. We know that there will be a few different speakers, and Esme, I was wondering if you knew those people's names who we might be hearing from during that event at this time.
I don't really know all of their names. I do know that this is happening around 3 p.m., right?
Yeah.
So we should be expected, like you mentioned, those road closures around that time and a little after as well.
I'm going to leave up our live picture there of Air Force One coming up to taxi and park at Austin Bergstrom International Airport. We should mention that President Biden is making his first public appearance since announcing that he would end his re-election campaign. This followed a lot of pressure from fellow Democrats saying that he should leave the race because of low poll numbers and that poor debate performance he had against former President Trump. He has since endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris. We do know that President Biden will be making another stop here in Texas. Esme, remind us about where he's going after he heads out of Austin.
Yes, so after he heads out of Austin, he is heading to Houston, where he will meet Vice President Kamala Harris. They will be commemorating one of the late congresswomen that recently just passed. They will be paying their respects to Sheila Jackson Lee in Houston, Texas.
Yeah, a very long time member of Congress, and they're going to pay their respects, as Esme just mentioned a few moments ago. But there you can see a beautiful shot of Air Force One. It's pretty majestic to see that plane at any point, regardless of your politics there, but it will be turning here onto the runway and then parking in front of where some of the reporters are gathered. And we will continue to show you this live shot so that we can see President Biden deplaning and then getting into his motorcade to head down to the LBJ Presidential Library. As we mentioned a few moments ago, he was initially set to speak about almost 2 weeks ago here in Austin. This is an event, as Esme was mentioning earlier, to commemorate 60 years of the Civil Rights Act. Esme, remind us again what some of those achievements from that law created here in the U.S.
Yes, well, so the Civil Rights Act was a landmark piece of legislation. It did prohibit discrimination and segregation in many different areas, including employment, public accommodations, voting rights, housing, and federally funded programs. It also provided for jury trials in cases of criminal civil rights violations.
So again, that is part of President Lyndon Johnson's legacy, signing that bill into law in 1964. We should note that I talked to the LBJ Library's director just last week about this upcoming visit and the fact that President Biden rescheduled his trip here to Austin, about what that meant. We should point out that 10 years ago, they marked 50 years of this law being in effect in the U.S., and at that time, 4 presidents were there to be able to mark that occasion, including then President Obama, George W. Bush, Jimmy Carter, and Bill Clinton. This time, it is just President Biden who is coming to this event, and according to the director, who told me during an interview last week, this was their dream guest. So they were very happy that the White House rescheduled this speech so that President Biden would be there in person to deliver these remarks. And we expect whenever Air Force One comes to a park here in just a few moments, a number of local delegation will be there to greet him here on the tarmac. People should be aware, though, that if they're traveling anywhere from the airport into downtown, that there will be lots of roads being either closed or traffic being diverted because of the presidential motorcade.
Yes, of course. If you are in between the area of downtown and the airport, I'm so sorry for that glitch, but if you're in between the area of downtown or the airport, you just want to make sure that you're making accommodations to your travel plans, because we're not sure what route the president is going to be taking towards downtown or towards the university campus area, but we do know that any route that he takes, those roads will be closed. So please stay aware of that.
It looks like Air Force One has now come to a parking position there at the tarmac at Austin's airport. You can see them going to put some stops underneath the front wheels there. We anticipate that the president will be getting off the plane here in just a few moments, and as well as some of the other members of his White House staff. We also expect to see some of our local leaders there to greet him as he comes off the plane. So we're going to carry that all in its entirety as soon as that happens. So stay with us for a little while longer as we now tell you President Biden has arrived here in Austin to eventually give a speech this afternoon at the LBJ Presidential Library. Our live signal, as you can see, there's a little bit of a jamming and a glitching there, and just bear with us as we continue to bring you this live picture. We will have that in its entirety, and we'll be back in just a moment. So again, stay with us here as we continue to bring you live coverage of President Biden's visit to Austin. Hi, everybody, and thanks again for joining us and being with us on KXAN Live. I'm Will Dupree in the KXAN Live studio. As you can see, the staircase from Air Force One is being lowered at this time. We expect President Biden to get off the plane here in just a few moments. Our fellow digital anchor here at KXAN, Esmeralda Zamora, is joining me throughout this afternoon to continue our coverage of the president's visit. Esme, this morning, just as we might have to cut off our comments here in just a few moments. As soon as President Biden comes off the plane, we'll also bring up the audio from that live picture so that you all can hear that. And if he answers any questions from reporters who will undoubtedly be shouting them over the windy conditions out there at Austin's airport. But this morning, President Biden, Esme, made a bit of news saying that he's calling for some reforms for the Supreme Court. What can you tell us about that?
Yes, he did make that announcement this morning. He kind of announced, I am calling for 3 bold reforms to restore trust and accountability to the court and our democracy. And out of those 3, he was talking about a constitutional amendment called the No One is Above the Law Amendment. That second one was term limits for Supreme Court justices. And the third one was a binding code of conduct for the Supreme Court. Now, I know that he might be speaking about this during his speech today. We anticipate that he's going to make a comment about this. Like you mentioned earlier in our stream, this is his first appearance since announcing that he will no longer be running in the presidential race. So these 3 topics of conversation are going to be very, very important for him to announce. And they kind of have to do with civil rights, right, Will?
Yeah, and I'm just wanting to point everybody to our live picture right now. You are seeing a number of not only federal but local leaders gathered there on the tarmac, including Congressman Greg Casar, Congressman Lloyd Doggett, and Congresswoman Sylvia Garcia of Houston, and Mayor Kirk Watson there on the right-hand side of your screen. He's the furthest there, kind of pointing and waving. Next to him is Travis County Judge Andy Brown. So these are a number of Texas Democratic leaders here in our area. They are obviously excited to see President Biden and greet him as he comes off the plane. Very interesting to point out, though, Congressman Lloyd Doggett, a veteran lawmaker here in our area, but he was the first House Democrat to actually call for President Biden to end his re-election campaign. And it turned out that he was right about that situation because the president made that decision just a day and a week ago to step out of the race for the 2024 presidential election. He has since endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris. And all of the Democratic leaders that you see there at the bottom of the stairs a few moments ago, they have all also endorsed Vice President Harris. So a lot of history and context to include in this visit. Joining me again here in the KXAN Live studio is Esmeralda Zamora, my fellow digital anchor here at KXAN, and we are trained here watching to see what this live picture and what unfolds because we anticipate that President Biden will be getting off the plane, climbing down the stairs there, getting into his motorcade, and then Esme, his speech is happening downtown at the LBJ Presidential Library and Museum.
Yes, and that means if anyone is making their way towards the downtown area or coming from the downtown area, we do not know what route the president plans on taking to make his speech on campus. So please be aware that there are road closures coming, and they will continue until President Biden is done with his event and is back onto the airplane, because he is heading to Houston. Right, Will?
Yeah, there's one more stop here in Texas after he delivers these remarks. Again, marking 60 years since the signing of the Civil Rights Act. He heads to Houston to pay his respects to Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. Again, a Houston Democrat, a longtime lawmaker there. We're also expecting Esme to see Vice President Harris. She has also announced that she will be coming to Houston to do the very same thing.
Yes, they will both be heading to Houston. They will both be there today, hopefully later this afternoon, like you mentioned, to pay their respects to the late Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee.
Potentially a very fast visit here to Austin, but we are again looking at a live picture there of Air Force One. You can see the presidential motorcade has set up. President Biden will be climbing into that vehicle that we're seeing kind of in the middle of our screen down there at the bottom of the stairs. A number of Democratic lawmakers and local federal leaders are gathered there just below the stairs. We're seeing Austin Mayor Kirk Watson, Travis County Judge Andy Brown there on the right side of your screen. Closer to the center, just at the very bottom of the stairs, that's Congressman Greg Casar, an Austin Democrat. And two people down from him is Congressman Lloyd Doggett. Right next to him, Congressman Al Green from the Houston area. And then I believe that's Lizzie Fletcher and Sylvia Garcia in succession there. So if you're wondering who these people are, that's who we're looking at this time. As I mentioned, Congressman Lloyd Doggett here in Austin made quite a bit of news because he was the first House Democrat to call for President Biden to withdraw from the presidential race and stop his quest to become the party's presidential nominee. And ultimately, President Biden listened to that call and withdrew from the presidential race only a week and a day ago. It seems like there's been so much that has happened, and it feels like that is, almost a month ago, because there's just been so much news, Esme. But President Biden is also making news this morning, announcing that he is calling for some reforms for the Supreme Court. I know you just mentioned those a few moments ago, Esme, but talk to us again about what the president would like to do, because we anticipate he might talk about that at his speech at the LBJ Library.
Yes, I believe he might talk about that, and those three things that he is planning or he announced were three bold reforms to restore trust and accountability to the court and to our democracy. The constitutional amendment called the No One is Above the Law Amendment. Oh, there we go. We see President Biden walking down the stairs at this very moment. We can see that he is about to maybe shake hands with a few of our local congressmen here.
And let's listen in as he is greeting some of our local leaders. There you can see Delaware Senator Chris Coons, a very close friend of the president, just directly behind him. But let's listen in as the president has now stepped off Air Force One here in Austin. Thanks again for joining us. Thanks again for being with us here on KXAN Live as we've been bringing you continuous coverage of President Biden's visit here to Austin. We've been looking at President Biden coming off Air Force One and greeting a number of not only federal but local Democratic leaders. They gathered there all at the bottom of the stairs. President Biden spent some time in his signature aviator glasses talking to all of them, shaking hands, taking pictures. And now you can see he has entered the limousine there where there's some Secret Service agents surrounding the vehicle. And we will anticipate him leaving the airport and heading to a location downtown for that speech. Where's he going?
Yes, he is going to the campus of the University of Texas's LBJ Library, and he will be doing a speech on the Civil Rights Act of 1964.
Yeah, it's 60 years since that landmark legislation was signed. This is a notable milestone, obviously, with 60 years since that passed. We should point out the library hosted a 50-year anniversary just 10 years ago, and that brought 4 presidents at that time to it. Today, they are welcoming in President Biden to deliver some remarks about that. And he may, as we mentioned, some reforms that he would like to see take place at the Supreme Court. Remind us about kind of what he talked about this morning in an announcement today.
Yes, this morning he announced that he is calling on 3 bold reforms to restore trust and accountability to the court and the democracy. The first one was a constitutional amendment called the No One is Above the Law Amendment. The second one was term limits for Supreme Court justices. And that third one is a binding code of conduct for the Supreme Court. We anticipate he might be speaking about this announcement in his speech today. We're not sure yet, but we think that he might. And after this speech, where is he headed to, Will?
Yeah, he is going to leave Austin and still stay here in Texas. He's going to go to Houston. So he'll take a flight there and pay his respects to the late Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, a longtime Democratic lawmaker in the Houston area. She died from cancer, I believe it was last week, and so there's been some events at least to pay some respects to her. I know she was lying in state at the Houston City Hall for a little bit. So there we see the presidential motorcade leaving after President Biden came off of Air Force One there. This is wheels down maybe 15 or so minutes ago. And now President Biden is heading to downtown. So please be aware, there are many road closures as we need to talk about. People should expect for traffic, at least from the airport to downtown to the LBJ Presidential Library, to be impacted. So if you're wondering, like, maybe where are all the cars in some parts of town, or why is there a roadblock happening, you are looking at it. This is the reason why President Biden's here in town to speak.
Yes, and we actually do not know which route he plans to take. We know there are plenty of routes from the airport to the downtown area. So if you are within those areas, you need to be aware that it's best if you take a different alternative route, maybe take a back road. These roads will be shut down for the president's travel to the campus.
And as we're just holding for a moment, I want to quickly switch over to a different view. So we have crews spread out all across the community, including down there at the LBJ Presidential Library. And we're going to go there in just a few moments to highlight the event that's going to be taking place this afternoon. But our crew, as we quickly go to a different view here, I'm just going to bring that up full screen because what we're anticipating is that our photographer who's stationed not too far outside the airport will watch the motorcade go by. So we're going to leave that picture up in full for you all to see the vehicles. There's lots of police, as well as you can see there, looks like they've stopped.
Road closures already.
Yeah, there are some road closures happening. Looks like they've stopped some of those people from being able to cross over to different parts of the road. So just bear with us for a few moments because we anticipate President Biden's motorcade to come by here in just a few moments. Again, this is the trek from the Austin airport to downtown, and people really get ready because there is going to be quite an impact of traffic all over the city as this motorcade makes its trip to downtown.
Now, we know I-35 is one of the areas of town that is always being congested, but today it's going to be even more congested, so I would avoid it at all costs.
That is very good advice. If you're just joining us, I'm Will Dupree. That is Esmeralda Zamora. We're the two digital anchors here at KXAN, and we are bringing you continuous coverage of President Biden's visit to Austin. We wanted to remind everybody that, this is a rescheduled visit for the president. He was initially supposed to speak the day after the attempted assassination against former President Trump. However, because of that situation, President Biden decided to reschedule, and today is the day when that's going to happen. What we're anticipating is that the president will deliver remarks at the 60th anniversary of the signing of the Civil Rights Act, a law that Texas's own President Lyndon B. Johnson signed back in 1964. And this is an event that will also feature a number of musical performances. We also expect the actor Bryan Cranston, who played LBJ in not only a Broadway play, but also in a movie. He's going to be delivering at least a portion of the president's remarks back in 1964. So we can expect that, and we will bring you all of that as soon as it begins. But right now we're just kind of tracking the motorcade as it makes its way from the airport into downtown. Remind us, Esme, though, we were talking about President Biden is making a couple of visits here to Texas today. He'll leave Austin a little later this afternoon, and remind us where he's going.
Yes, so aside from his visit today, he will also be heading to Houston, Texas. He's going to make a visit there with the Vice President Kamala Harris to pay their respects to the late Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, who they are celebrating her life today in Houston, Texas.
Yeah, that long-term lawmaker had died from cancer, and there's been some efforts to be able to remember her life. So President Biden, who himself is a longtime lawmaker in D.C., knew her well and is going to be joining in part of those celebrations. We also have to remind everybody that, there is a bit of history in addition to all of this. We touched on the fact that the attempted assassination 2 weeks ago against former President Trump delayed this visit here to Austin by President Biden. However, just last Sunday, so 2 Sundays ago, President Biden announced that he himself is withdrawing from the 2024 presidential race and would not seek the Democratic Party's nomination. He quickly threw his support behind his vice president, Kamala Harris, who is now launching her campaign, transitioning away from just holding that VP slot to now seeking the highest office here in the U.S. So we have so much to cover and have been doing comprehensive coverage of not only this visit, but also all of that history that's been happening in the last 2 weeks on our website at kxan.com. But you can follow along with our reporting about today's visit here to Austin at kxan.com. So I'll direct you there too, as we await to see the president's motorcade coming by. It looks like there are some people waiting on the back of a
pickup truck?
Yeah, a pickup truck maybe to see the president come by. So yeah, we'll see whether maybe even we get away from the president to the people who are waiting there. This is just a bit of history. So the president visiting here to Austin.
Yes, and like you mentioned, this is his first public appearance since the attempted assassination on the former President Donald Trump. And there are Secret Service concerns going around due to that event that did happen. Congress is opening its own investigation into the operational failures that led to the assassination attempt on former President Donald Trump. And we do know that this is why he did reschedule his original visit to Austin, correct?
Yes, and since then, too, the Secret Service director has also resigned her position because of the fallout from the failures to protect former President Trump at his rally in Pennsylvania. Let's quickly, I'm going to pull up our cameras again and then see what other views that we have in town. So this is just outside the airport. We're anticipating that President Biden's motorcade will go by in just a few moments, but I'm going to skip over really quickly. This is another area. Looks like we have not been tuning in our live shot there just yet. I'm going to pull up one more. That one also is not connected just yet, so we're going to bring back up this one, again showing you the roads outside the airport. We're expecting President Biden to pass by in just a few moments, heading to downtown where he's speaking at the LBJ Presidential Library and Museum.
Looks like somebody's driving down the road right now.
Look, you can see two police officers on their motorcycles, so I think that's the front end of that motorcade. So let's watch as this passes by and see whether or not people maybe wave or get away from the president as that happens.
Looks like they're already making their way up the hill.
Yeah, I'm going to bring up the microphone from our camera crew who is out there outside the airport. So let's listen in as the motorcade carrying President Biden comes from the airport to downtown Austin. We've been watching the motorcade carrying President Biden passing from the airport, headed to downtown. A few people out there you can see waving. They've got their phones out, recording this moment in history. It's not too often that some people get to see the president up close, or at least his motorcade passing by, so they wanted to come out to mark that moment. You've been watching our continuous coverage this afternoon of President Biden arriving here in Austin and now headed to speak in downtown Austin. Esmeralda Zamora, our fellow digital anchor here at KXAN, has been joining me this afternoon. And Esme, one of our colleagues is at the library today where that speech is going to happen. They're marking 60 years since the Civil Rights Act was signed into law. And we're getting a sense about what that process looks like, because that's a big security procedure that's happening there too, for people to go in and listen to the president.
Yes, of course. And there are going to be other speakers that are going to be speaking with President Biden today. There will be a short film, a musical performance, readings, more musical performances, welcomes, introductions of the president, and then keynote addresses, including the President Joe Biden, who will be speaking. And we have a few things that we think he might be speaking about, right,
yeah.
Will?
Yeah, that is true. It's anticipated that he will be speaking about some reforms that he would like to see happen at the Supreme Court. So we will be showing you those remarks as soon as they begin. But our colleague, Haley Syhawk, who is the news director here at KXAN, she is there at the library and is sharing some information about how people are waiting quite a while to be able to get into the library. People started lining up as early as 1 p.m. Of course, it's a very hot day out there. The library started handing out water to those people who are waiting outside to be able to get in and listen to President Biden's speech. And then once they're inside, they are apparently funneled into 2 different security lines staffed by Secret Service officials. And there are canines as well trying to assess the threats and also monitor the safety and security of the president as well as the other dignitaries who were gathered there at the auditorium. So we're losing that signal really quickly. I'm going to pull up another live shot. And why don't you remind us, Esme, what the president will be speaking about today and why it's important what he's doing there at the LBJ Presidential Library.
Yes, of course. Well, I just wanted to point out that our coworker did say it took her about 20 to 25 minutes to get through security. So that should help us figure out how secure this event is going to be. And like you mentioned, he is going to be speaking about the Civil Rights Act of 1964. That was a landmark piece of legislation. It prohibited discrimination and segregation in many areas of American life, and those areas are employment, public accommodations, voting rights, housing, and federally funded programs.
We are now switching over to a live feed from the LBJ Presidential Library and Museum. The event to mark 60 years since President Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act has now officially begun. Esme was just running through a few moments ago the order of the show today. That's starting off with a film marking this historic moment. Let's listen in as that gets underway. You are looking live again inside the auditorium at the LBJ Presidential Library.
Is safe and no gain is secure in this society unless those advantages and those gains are opened up to all alike.
I remember one time I drove up in front of the only service station in Plains, and they refused to put gasoline in my car because they considered us to be, I won't use the word, lovers of black people. And so we struggled through that. 2 years later, when I was finishing up my first year in the Senate, Lyndon Johnson came along with his great insight and political courage and literally changed my personal life and the life of everyone that lived in America.
There are no final victories in politics. We were given a mission that will never be completed, to move toward a more perfect union. And we always know that around every turn in the road, the forces who want to turn back the clock or divide those who would make a common future are ready.
I've got great respect for the way President Johnson used the presidency to achieve big goals. He understood the risk for his party and the risk to his coalition in pushing civil rights. No one knew politics better than LBJ. Yet when challenged, he responded, well, what the hell's the presidency for? Every generation of Americans will look back at the Civil Rights Act and say, this is what the presidency is for.
Perhaps easy to conclude that there are limits to change, that we are trapped by our own history, and politics is a fool's errand. And we'd be better off if we roll back big chunks of LBJ's legacy, or at least if we don't invest too much of our hope in our government. I reject such cynicism because I have lived out the promise of LBJ's efforts, because Michelle has lived out the legacy of those efforts, because my daughters have lived out the legacy of those efforts, because I and millions of my generation were in a position to take the baton that he handed to us. Our rights, our freedoms, they are not given. They must be won. They must be nurtured through struggle and discipline and persistence and faith.
Winds of change are blowing in, and I know, yes I know, it feels like freedom. Been a long and a lonely road, but I'm finally coming home. And oh yeah, it feels like freedom. Are you ready now? 'Cause I'm ready now for a change to come. Feet don't fail me now, 'cause I'm ready now to move on and sing a new song. Storm clouds are breaking, and my worries, they are fading. And oh yeah, it feels like freedom. And my sisters and my brothers, I see them coming together. And oh yeah, well it feels like freedom. Are you ready now? 'Cause I'm ready now for a change to come. Feet don't fail
Thanks again for being with us. We've been listening in to the concert choir from the Houston-Tillotson University campus, as well as the Grammy-nominated musician Ruthie Foster. She delivered that powerful performance just a few moments ago. Now we are anticipating some readings led by actor Bryan Cranston. These are remarks made by former President Lyndon Johnson about the Civil Rights Act, which this event is all focusing on today. It marks 60 years since the signing of that legislation. Let's listen in.
I want to take this occasion to talk to you about what that law means to every American.
188 years ago this week, a small band of valiant men began a long struggle for freedom. They pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor, not only to found a nation, but to forge an ideal of freedom, not only for political independence, but for personal liberty, not only to eliminate foreign rule, but to establish a rule of justice in the affairs of men. That struggle was a turning point in our history. Today, in far corners of distant continents, the ideals of those American patriots still shape the struggles of men who hunger for freedom. This is a proud triumph. Yet those who founded our country knew that freedom would be secure only if each generation fought to renew and enlarge its meaning. From the Minutemen in Concord to the soldiers in Vietnam, each generation has been equal to that trust. Americans of every race and color have died in battle to protect our freedom. Americans of every race and color have worked to build a nation of widening opportunities. Now, our generation of Americans has been called on to continue the unending search for justice within our borders. We believe that all men are created equal, yet many are denied equal treatment. We believe that all men have certain unalienable rights, yet many Americans do not enjoy those rights. We believe that all men are entitled to the blessings of liberty, yet millions are being deprived of those blessings, not because of their own failures, but because of the color of their skin. The reasons are deeply embedded in history and tradition and the nature of man. We can understand without rancor or hatred how this all happened, but it cannot continue. Our Constitution, the foundation of our republic, forbids it. The principles of our freedom forbid it. Morality forbids it. And the law I will sign tonight forbids it. Its purpose is to promote a more abiding commitment to freedom, a more constant pursuit of justice, and a deeper respect for human dignity. We will achieve these goals because most Americans are law-abiding citizens and want to do the right thing. This is why the Civil Rights Act relies first on voluntary compliance, then on the efforts of local communities and states to secure the rights of citizens. It provides for the national authority to step in only when others cannot or will not do their job. This Civil Rights Act is a challenge to all of us to go to work in our communities and our states, in our homes and in our hearts, to eliminate the last vestiges of injustice in our beloved country. My fellow citizens, we have come now to a time of testing, we must not fail. Let us close the springs of racial poison. Let us pray for wise and understanding hearts. Let us lay aside irrelevant differences and make our nation whole.
If I had a hammer in the morning, a hammer in the evening, all over this land, I'd hammer out danger, I'd hammer out warning, I'd hammer out a love between my brothers and my sisters. Over this land. If I had a bell, I'd ring it in the morning, I'd ring it in the evening, all over this land. I'd ring out danger, I'd ring out a warning, I'd ring out a love between my brothers and my sisters, all over this land, all over. If I had a song, sing it in the morning, I sing it in the evening, all over this land. I'd sing out danger, I'd sing out a warning, I'd sing out a love between my brothers and my sisters, all over this land. I've got a hammer, and I've got a bell, and I've got a song to sing all over this land. It's the hammer of justice, oh, it's the bell of freedom. It's a song about a love between my brothers and my sisters. Over this land, all over.
We just heard another musical performance from Grammy-nominated artist Ruthie Foster. According to the program that's been shared with us, up next we're going to hear some remarks welcoming people there today to the LBJ Presidential Library from Mark Updegrove. He is the president and CEO of the LBJ Foundation. Following him will be the former ambassador to the United Nations, Andrew Young, who will introduce President Biden, and President Biden will be the keynote speaker to conclude out this event, marking 60 years since the signing of the Civil Rights Act. Stay with us as we continue to bring you this ongoing streaming coverage of this event, a presidential visit here to Austin. And it appears they're getting ready for the president's visit, putting the presidential seal on the lectern there at the LBJ Presidential Library. Joining me again is our digital anchor here at KXAN, Esmeralda Zamora. Esme, remind us again that President Biden is here to speak about 60 years since the signing of the Civil Rights Act.
Yes, he's here to speak on behalf of the Civil Rights Act. And we just want to share with you all, the Civil Rights Act is a landmark piece of legislation, and it prohibited discrimination and segregation in many areas of American life. Those areas are employment, public accommodations, voting rights, housing, and lastly, federally funded programs. And following his speech today, President Biden will also make a second stop at Houston, Texas, to honor the former Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, remembering her life and her legacy she left behind. Earlier, we did mention that Vice President Kamala Harris would be with him, but she actually will not be. She will be there this Thursday this week.
Yeah, we just wanted to remind everybody of that correction. In the midst of our coverage today, we mentioned that she would be there today. Again, as Esme just said, she will not be there today. She will be there later this week. Coming up, we'll expect some comments from the LBJ Foundation's director, Mark Updegrove. He's going to first speak here in just a few moments, welcoming everyone to the LBJ Presidential Library. Then the former UN ambassador, Andrew Young, will deliver an introduction for President Biden, and then we will hear from the president talking about this anniversary today. This is a trip, Esme, that he rescheduled after he was supposed to speak the day after the attempted assassination against former President Trump, but he decided to push off that trip due to the nature of what happened. And today is the day that they rescheduled that speech. But we anticipate he might be talking about some of these Supreme Court reforms that he announced today. Walk us through again what some of those are, because we could be hearing about them a little bit more in just a few moments.
Yeah, so this is his first major public appearance following the attempted assassination to the former president, Donald Trump. He did make a big announcement this morning where he announced, "I am calling for 3 bold reforms to restore trust and accountability to the court and our democracy." Those 3 bold reforms that he is talking about is a constitutional amendment called the No One is Above the Law Amendment, term limits for Supreme Court justices, and lastly, a binding code of conduct for the Supreme Court. Like Will mentioned, we do anticipate that he does add this to his speech today, to what he's going to be talking about, because it kind of does tie into civil rights and the reason he's here in Austin today. I have other points on his announcement. He kind of mentioned that his plan to reform the Supreme Court and ensure no president is above the law must prevent the abuse of presidential power and restore the public's faith in the judicial system. He also this is his quote, "What is happening now is not normal, and it undermines the public's confidence in the court's decisions, including those impacting personal freedoms." So once again, we do anticipate him touching on these points in his speech today.
And just this past Wednesday, when President Biden spoke to the nation, he talked about in the last 6 months that he has left in office, he would like to tackle some of these Supreme Court reforms. However, we know there is a divided Congress, and with the election quickly approaching, whether or not some of these lawmakers will take up these reforms is yet to be seen. But again, this is what the argument President Biden is laying out at this time. We should also point out this is his first public address since he spoke to the nation again on Wednesday, explaining his decision to withdraw from the 2024 presidential race. He has since endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris. We imagine he'll be speaking about that incredibly shocking announcement that he did during this speech today. So we'll be listening in and carry those remarks until they conclude as soon as they begin. So stay with us for a little while longer as we continue our streaming coverage of President Biden's visit here to Austin and his speech at the LBJ Presidential Library. Thanks again for sticking with us here on KXAN Live. Will Dupree back in the KXAN Live studio with our digital anchor, Esmeralda Zamora. Esme, thanks for sticking with us for this time to provide some more updates and information about this visit. What we're about to see here in just hopefully a few moments is the introduction to President Biden, who's going to deliver some remarks to mark the 60th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act signing by President Lyndon B. Johnson. In addition to all of this, we've been covering the motorcade getting there to downtown Austin. There are a number of roads affected by that. And Esme, I wanted to really quickly bring up our website because on KXAN.com there is a traffic map available and you can kind of see where there are some delays or possibly closures happening. And there are quite a few because of the president's visit today. So on our website, under the Weather and Traffic tab, you can click right here on traffic and it will open up this map. The red means those roads are closed at the time. And as you can see, there are these closures here by the Austin Bergstrom International Airport where the mouse is moving right there. And here in downtown, very close to the LBJ Presidential Library. But remind people, Esme, that they need to be very mindful of this because this will be a pretty big issue throughout the afternoon.
Yes, of course. He's going to be here anticipated till about after 4 o'clock. So these closures are going to continue into when residents start coming to get out of work or going out and about. So just remember, if you can see on your map, what we think the major roadway closures, kind of his way back to the airport, his way towards the campus, was 71 closures going into Del Valle, I-35 complete closure, I-183 down to Colton and up to East Austin. Those are the major closures that we're seeing. So if you can avoid these areas, it would be best. If you can find alternate routes, I would completely stay away of I-35 because that seems to be the most closures that we're seeing right now. So just remember, make accommodations, take an alternate route. These closures are going to continue past 4 p.m.
And again, this is a look at our traffic map that's available right now on KXAN.com. I was checking to see other messages that are being sent by our news team here. We have a number of reporters and crews spread out all over the area, also there at the LBJ Presidential Library, which we are looking live into, the auditorium at that facility. It's a big day because President Biden is in town to speak about the 60th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act. One of our colleagues there who is at the facility shared a few moments ago that part of the delegation of local Democratic leaders who were gathering at the airport are now there at the library, and so that maybe signals to us that this event is about to get underway. Earlier, we had some musical performances from a musician named Ruthie Foster, as well as the Houston Tillotson University Concert Choir. We also heard remarks from actor Bryan Cranston. You may remember he portrayed LBJ in not only a Broadway play, but also a movie. His kind of cadence of LBJ came back up there. The character surged back into him, and he delivered those remarks, again, marking this anniversary of this law being signed. As we just talk about, again, what some of these parts of this law that were passed that are still in effect today.
Yeah, so this law, it was a landmark piece of the legislation all the way from 1964. This law prohibited discrimination and segregation in many areas of the American life. Those areas include employment, public accommodations, voting rights, housing, as well as federally funded programs. It also created a Commission on Civil Rights, established a Civil Rights Division within the Department of Justice, and provided for jury trials in cases for criminal civil rights violations. And as we mentioned earlier, this is the first major public appearance for the president since former President Trump's attempted assassination. He kind of canceled his original date to come to speak on this matter, but he is back here today, and we anticipate he might have other talking points to mention, right, Will?
Yeah, that is true. This morning, he announced several proposals to reform the Supreme Court of the United States, including possible term limits and adoption of a code of ethics. There's been some questions, particularly among Democrats, about the current justices on the Supreme Court, so this is perhaps speaking to that idea. And we also anticipate that he will be speaking about his decision to withdraw from the presidential race. It's a history that is notable given where we are going to be hearing him speak. Former President Lyndon Johnson actually stepped down from running for the Democratic nomination back in 1968. That is the most recent example of a decision that President Biden just made. So I had a chance just last week to talk to the director of the library, and he mentioned, this is a part of LBJ's history that he didn't anticipate really being highlighted anytime soon again. But because of what President Biden decided to do, that history is now back up in the forefront. Likely will come up in President Biden's address today, and also talking about this anniversary of the landmark Civil Rights Act being signed into law back 60 years ago at this point. The director also told me, Esme, that he was very grateful that the president accepted the invitation to come and speak. It was their, quote, dream guest for having the president come to speak about this particular milestone. So fortunately, they were able to schedule the visit, have him come and speak, and you can see the lectern there now emblazoned with the presidential seal along with the presidential flag and American flag behind him. President Biden should be coming to speak here relatively soon. But Esme, one thing we've been mentioning is that the impact to traffic this is going to have. We're coming up not too long from now into rush hour, and undoubtedly people out there will be impacted by the presidential motorcade leaving the library so that President Biden can get back to the Austin airport.
Yes, earlier today, while the president was making his way to campus, we already had residents on the road seeing the impact from those closures. Before, we didn't really know what major highways he was going to take, but now that we do know what route he took into campus, we kind of have an idea of where he's going to take his route back to the airport. So right now we see closures on 71 going all the way into Del Valley, on I-35 completely to south all the way to north. We have I-83 down to Colton, closures all the way up to East Austin. So if you plan on getting home from work around after 4 o'clock, if you have plans to go anywhere around that time, just remember that these major roadways are going to be closed, and it is best if you find an alternate route or simply just wait it out.
I'm again going to highlight our website. We plug it very constantly, but today it might really come into handy if you're trying to figure out what ways to get around and avoid some of these closures for the presidential motorcade. So again, on our website right here, if you go to the web homepage, kxan.com, under the Weather and Traffic tab, go here to the Traffic section. It will open up and you'll see our traffic conditions map. A number of areas in red, either signifying slowdowns or outright closures. This will really be impacted by this route from downtown Austin, where the University of Texas is and the speech is happening, through I-35, perhaps to 71 and 183, going back to the airport. That's where President Biden will fly out a little later today. And Esme, we also know that President Biden is not done with his visit to Texas. Austin is not the final stop. Where else is he headed today?
You're right. Austin is not his final stop. And if you plan on driving to Houston today, I would make accommodations because he is also heading up there. He plans to visit Houston after his visit here at the LBJ Library. He will be paying his respects to the late Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. He's going to be remembering her with a group of others who are going to be there as well, remembering her. And as we mentioned earlier, we did have a correction in this announcement. The Vice President Kamala Harris will not join him today. She will join him on Thursday later this week.
And I just want to highlight really quickly another tweet from Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee's office. They put out there that she is going to lie in state at City Hall in Houston from 9 this morning till 7 this evening. And visitors obviously are intended to pay their respects and sign a guest book in memory of the late lawmaker. President Biden will be headed there too as this event unfolds to honor the life of Sheila Jackson Lee. We're coming back now to look at a live picture from inside the auditorium at the LBJ Presidential Library and Museum, not too far from our station here on the UT campus. This is where President Biden is going to deliver some remarks to mark the 60th anniversary of the signing of the Civil Rights Act. We anticipate that he might also be making some other remarks during that speech, namely about his decision to withdraw from the presidential race, a very similar decision that President Johnson made back in 1968. We also expect President Biden to possibly talk about some of these changes that he would like to see happen regarding the Supreme Court. A number of those proposals brought up today in an announcement this morning. We kind of saw some foreshadowing for this. President Biden said in his national address on Wednesday that he would like to tackle these reforms before he leaves office in January. And we'll just have to see whether or not lawmakers there in D.C. will be willing to take up some of these reforms. Perhaps Democrats will, but of course we have a divided government at the moment, and whether or not that moves through is up in the air at this time. Esme, as we're looking in there into the auditorium, this is a visit that had been rescheduled because of a historic event that happened not too long ago too, the attempted assassination against former President Trump. That's also raised some questions about the Secret Service.
Yes.
You've been looking up some information about that. Tell us about that.
Yes, this is his first visit since that attempted assassination to the former President Donald Trump, like you mentioned. He canceled his first stop to Austin because of security concerns. I think somebody is about to talk on the stage right now if we want to listen and hear what they have to say. Oh, they walked off. There we go.
It looks like this is
starting.
Yes, this is the director of the LBJ Foundation. Let's listen in as his remarks begin. His name is Mark Updegrove.
LBJ Foundation, welcome to our commemoration of the 60th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And thank you A huge thank you to the Houston Tillotson Choir, to Ruthie Foster, and to Brian Cranston for introducing this in such a grand manner. The walls of the LBJ Auditorium once again echo with history and voices from the past. 8 years after speaking to Americans in advance of signing the Civil Rights Act, which made real our nation's most sacred promise of all men are created equal, Lyndon Johnson stood on this stage as a former president and delivered his last public remarks. Battling a weak heart, President Johnson defied doctors' orders to give a keynote address at a civil rights symposium he had convened to talk about the state of race in America. He had something to say, and he was determined to say it. Until we overcome unequal history, he declared, we can't overcome unequal opportunity. There is work still to be done, so let's be on with it. The work would fall to others. The following month, our 36th president died of a heart attack at his beloved LBJ ranch. But even now, half a century later, we hear his call. Since then, 4 other presidents, including the first African-American president, have graced this stage to recognize the advancement of civil rights and to talk about the work still to be done. Today, we are deeply honored to welcome the 46th president, Joe Biden, who has made the central cause of his presidency the preservation and strengthening of democracy and has pursued a policy of equity for all, including people of color and others who have been historically underserved, marginalized, and adversely affected by persistent poverty and inequality. Among the many things he has done is to appoint the first black woman, Ketanji Brown Jackson, to the U.S. Supreme Court. And to choose as his running mate, Kamala Harris, the first black woman, South Asian American to hold the vice president, but you already knew that. We are grateful to President Biden for his policy to bolster voting rights, which have been severely weakened since Lyndon Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act in 1965, and for all of his efforts to return our nation to the democratic norms and values that provide ballast to our great republic. Dr. Martin Luther King said, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice." America is at its strongest when justice prevails, and when the winds of change make our country more united, more inclusive, more righteous. The Civil Rights Act we commemorate today, as well as the Voting Rights Act and Fair Housing Act, all championed and signed by Lyndon Johnson, are on exhibition in the LBJ Library's Great Hall just above us. Those transformative laws are surrounded by iconic photographs of the activists who held the front lines of the civil rights movement and whose unyielding fearlessness in the face of racial tyranny helped bend the arc of the moral universe toward justice and a more perfect union. Among them is Andrew Young, who stood by the side of Martin Luther King Jr. as a lieutenant in the movement they forged as much as any. Upon awarding Ambassador Young the Medal of Freedom, President Jimmy Carter said, "Andy Young is the brightest star in the American firmament. He's a man who represents integrity and understanding, humility and purpose. He has carried on well the heritage of Martin Luther King." To introduce the President of the United States, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Ambassador Andrew Young.
I was lined up waiting to be sworn in for Congress. And there was another little fella in the Senate who was too young to get in. They had to wait 3 or 4 days till he turned 30 to swear him in as a United States Senator. For the last 50 years, he has devoted himself to fulfilling the dreams of the American people, all of them, rich, poor, black, white, red, green, gay, straight, whatever we are. And I'm here reminding you that if you live long enough, all of us are going to be handicapped one day. But few people have been able to thrive and succeed in the midst of so much pressure and tension and responsibility as Joe Biden. And I was thinking what I should say, and I said that maybe Ray Charles said it best when he started his recording of America the Beautiful with the third verse of that song. And it said, "Oh, beautiful for heroes proved in liberating strife, who more than self their country loved, and mercy more than life. America, America, may God thy gold refine, till all success be nobleness, and every gain divine." I think that is a promise fulfilled in the life of the 46th President of the United States, Joseph Biden. Mr. President,
now the war is not over, victory isn't won, but we'll fight on to the finish, and when it's all done.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Really. Thank you. Please. Please. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Mr. Ambassador, thanks for that introduction, and above all, for your friendship over the years. There's literally one word that comes to mind every time I think of Andy Young. The word's integrity, absolute integrity. And thank you to the Johnson family for carrying forward the legacy of a truly great president and first lady. Your mom was incredible as well. The same goes to Mark Upgrove, president of the LBJ Foundation. It's great to be back here. I thank you all and distinguished guests gathered here today. Look, I was in college at the University of Delaware in our early beginning years when I heard the news that President Kennedy had been assassinated. I remember exactly like anybody in my generation remembers exactly where they were sitting, standing, or walking. I was on the steps of one of the university halls called Hullion Hall at the university, listening on a transistor radio with 3 other people. Seemed unbelievable. And then, later watching President Johnson help the nation find a way forward. In his first address after the tragedy, President Johnson said, and I quote, "Nothing could more eloquently honor President Kennedy's memory than the earliest passage of the Civil Rights Bill." That's what he said. As a kid coming up, I always admired President Johnson for his public service, whether it was a school teacher in South Texas, master of the United States Senate, historic Vice President and President, his philosophy was simple. In a great society, no one should be left behind. He'd say, it's time for us to come to see that every American gets a decent break and a fair chance to make good. And as Andy Young said, President Johnson met repeatedly with the civil rights leaders and built a coalition to bring that vision to life. And he did. He brought it to life. Over 50 years, the LBJ Foundation has convened this symposium to reflect one of the crowning achievements, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, a defining moment that has since opened doors of opportunities for all Americans, regardless of race, sexual orientation, gender identity, religion, national origin. Together with the Voting Rights Act and the Fair Housing Act, these three landmark laws he signed are remarkable in their scale and their scope. Taken together, these three acts have made this nation fundamentally more fair, fundamentally more just, and most importantly, fundamentally more consistent with our founding principles. For real. And we're a better nation because of them. We must be clear. Their work, our work, is not done. It's not done. We do not celebrate these laws as part of our past, but as critical components of our future. President Johnson understood what President Lincoln understood in his own time, that the courts would determine the scale and scope of our laws. Over 100 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, President Johnson vowed, in his words, to do this job that Lincoln started, by challenging the court to live up to its constitutional responsibility. He did that by nominating Thurgood Marshall as the first black justice of the Supreme Court. And by aggressively defending civil rights throughout the courts. But now, we live in a different era. In recent years, extreme opinions that the Supreme Court has handed down have undermined long-established civil rights principles and protections. In 2013, the Supreme Court in Shelby County case gutted the Voting Rights Act, opening the floodgates to a wave of restrictive voting laws that have seen states across the country pass. In 2022, the court overruled Roe v. Wade and the right to choose that had been the law of the land for 50 years. 50 years. The following year, the same court eviscerated affirmative action, which had been upheld and reaffirmed for nearly 50 years as well. And now, there's an extreme movement and agenda called Project 2025. Well, by the way, they're serious, man. They're planning another onslaught attacking civil rights in America. For example, Project 2025 calls aggressively attacking diversity, equity, and inclusion across all aspects of American life. This extreme MAGA movement even proposes to end birthright citizenship. That's how far they've come. End birthright citizenship. Which if you're born in America, you're an American citizen. That's how extreme these guys are. This issue, and so many other civil rights that Americans take for granted, are likely to come before the court in years to come. And most recently and most shockingly, the Supreme Court established in Trump versus the United States a dangerous precedent. They ruled, as you know, that the President of the United States has immunity for potential crimes he may have committed while in office. Immunity. This nation was founded on the principle there are no kings in America. Each of us is equal before the law. No one is above the law. And for all practical purposes, the court's decision almost certainly means that the president can violate their oath, flout our laws, and face no consequences. Here's what Justice Sotomayor, Supreme Court Justice, wrote in her dissent. And I quote, "Under the majority's reasoning, the President now will be insulated from criminal prosecution. Orders a Navy SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival. Immune. Organizes a military coup to hold on to power. Immune. Takes a bribe in exchange for a pardon. Immune. In every use of official power, the President is now a king above the law." Just what Justice Sotomayor wrote in her dissent. Folks, just imagine what a president could do in trampling civil rights and liberties given such immunity. The court's being used to weaponize an extreme and unchecked agenda. This decision is a total affront to the basic expectations we have for those who wield the power in this nation, that they are expected to be wholly accountable under the law. The President is no longer constrained by the law, and only limits on abuse of power will be self-imposed by the President alone. That's a fundamentally flawed view and a fundamentally flawed principle, a dangerous principle. On top of its extreme decisions, the court is mired in a crisis of ethics. These scandals involving the justices have caused public opinion to question the court's fairness and independence that are essential to faithfully carrying out its mission of equal justice under the law. For example, there are documented reports of a decades-long effort to reshape the judiciary, including the Supreme Court backed by shadow special interests that also support Project 2025. Undisclosed gift to justice is worth hundreds of thousands of dollars from wealthy benefactors who have interest before the very court they're contributing to. Conflicts of interest from those connected to January 6th insurrectionists. And a blatant attack on nominating and confirming justices of the court itself. Do you all remember when Justice Scalia died in February of 2016? And the Republicans blocked the President's nomination, President Obama's nomination, to fill that vacancy for nearly a year by making up an entirely new standard that there be no confirmations of the court during an election year. But then, when Justice Ginsburg died in 2020, Republicans rushed through the President Trump's nominee at the very same time votes are being cast in an election that Trump would lose. It's outrageous. I know I don't look it, but I served in the Senate for 36 years, including as chairman and ranking member of the Judiciary Committee. I've been told that I've overseen more Supreme Court nominations as senator, vice president, and president than anyone in history, anyone alive today, I should say. I have great respect for our institutions and the separation of powers laid out in our Constitution. But what's happening now is not consistent with that doctrine of separation of powers. Extremism is undermining the public confidence in the court's decisions. As soon as I came to office, I convened a bipartisan presidential commission on the Supreme Court of the United States, comprised of leading constitutional scholars, both liberal and conservative, to provide recommendations on potential reforms to the court. I've been careful in these deliberations because these are serious, serious decisions. In the face of increasing threats to American democratic institutions, I used the Commission's analysis, and today I'm calling for 3 bold reforms to restore trust and accountability to the court and our democracy. As the press shouted to me as I got off Air Force One, the Republican Speaker of the House said, "Whatever he proposes is dead on arrival." Well, I think his thinking is dead on arrival. First, I'm calling for a constitutional amendment called No One is Above the Law Amendment. It holds, and I mean this sincerely, it holds that there's no immunity for crimes former president committed while in office. I share
our founders' belief that the president must answer to the law. The president is accountable in the exercise of the great power of the presidency. We're a nation of laws, not kings and dictators. The decision can be boiled down to the title of one case, Trump versus the United States. The court asserted it was making a ruling for the ages. That isn't true. The court made a ruling for one, a former president. No other president in our history has asked for this kind of immunity for criminal actions. And no president, no former president, not me, not one, has and should have been given any exception to this with such immunity. The second thing I'm asking for, we've had term limits for presidents of the United States for nearly 75 years after the Truman administration. And I believe we should have term limits for Supreme Court justices of the United States as well. In fact, the United States is the only major constitutional democracy that gives lifetime seats in their high court. Term limits would help ensure that the court membership changes with some regularity. That would make timing for the court's nomination more predictable and less arbitrary. Reduce the chance that any single presidency imposes undue influence in generations to come. The bipartisan commission I convened analyzed various term limit structures. Based on their report, I believe the best structure is the 18-year term limit. That would help ensure the country would not have what it has now. An extreme court that's the product of an attack on the confirmation process that's been weaponized by those seeking to carry out an extreme agenda for decades to come. By the way, these guys mean it. These guys mean it. Project 2025 is real. They mean it. Third, I'm calling for a binding code of conduct for the Supreme Court. Supreme Court's current ethics code is weak and even more frightening, voluntary. Any code of Congress must be enforceable. Under the reform I propose, justice would be required to disclose gifts, refrain from public political activity, recuse themselves in cases in which they or their spouses have a financial or other conflict of interest. Most people don't realize that Congress passed a law decades ago that says all federal judges, including Supreme Court justices, have to recuse themselves in such cases. But the current justices insist on enforcing that requirement themselves without any public oversight or compulsion. See, that's their decision. They don't have to tell us how they made it. That might work if the court was actually enforcing those requirements, but they are not. The court is not self-policing. The court is not dealing with the obvious conflicts of interest. We need a mandatory code of ethics for the Supreme Court, and we need it now. My fellow Americans, based on all my experience, I'm certain we need these reforms. We need these reforms to restore trust in the courts, preserve the system of checks and balances that are vital to our democracy. There are also common sense reforms that the vast majority of the American people support, as well as leading constitutional law scholars, progressives, and conservatives. I look forward to working with the Congress to implement these necessary reforms. A number of members of Congress are here today. Let me close with this. President Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964 just 2 days before the 4th of July. He said in that bill signing, and I quote, "This is a proud triumph. Yet those who founded our country knew that freedom would be secure only if Each generation fought to renew in largest meaning, end of quote. That's what I've tried to do throughout my career, inspired by the cause of civil rights. That's what got me involved initially. My state was a state that was segregated by law. We were one who, only reason we didn't fight in the side of the South, we couldn't get there. I'm serious. What motivated me to be a public defender, a county councilman, I'll never forget, I had a good job with a big trial firm. And in Delaware, you have to study for the bar for 6 months before you're allowed to take it. And in the meantime, I was studying for the bar. That's when Dr. King was assassinated. We're the only state in the nation, city in the nation, that had the military stationed on every corner with drawn bayonets for 10 months. For 10 months, insisting, because we had a very conservative Democratic governor. In those days, when the Democrats won, they could choose to be part of the Southern Governors or the Northeast Governors Conference. They choose the Southern Governors Conference lots of times. But guess what? It got me engaged. I love how reading these biographies of me now that I knew I was going to run for president. I remember walking in to the public defender's office, which was part-time at the time, and asking for an application because I wanted to join the public defender's office. And he looked at me and said, Franny Kearns, he said, "Don't you work for Pickett Warburton Sanders?" I said, "Yeah." So why the hell would you want to do this? Not a joke. But I said, let me do it. I became a public defender. Folks, here's the deal. Because I got engaged like a lot of you do, whether you run for office or not. You get engaged and you want to change things. So I kept trying to change the Democratic Party in my state, which is very conservative. And then a group of people came to me, as my senator knows, Chris Coons, came to me and said, "Look, we want you to run for state senate." I said, I can't go to Dover all the time. I'm just starting a law firm. I'm a part-time public defender. And then they came back to me and said, "Why don't you run for the county council?" I said, I can't. They said, "You stupid SOB, it's right across the street there." I'm serious. Meets only twice a week. So my sister, my best friend, managed my campaign. And we picked a district that we couldn't possibly win. No Democrat had ever won. But my problem was I had my sister doing my campaign. And we won. Next thing I know, I was part of a group assigned as young senators, young elected officials, to try to bring the party around to get someone to run for the United States Senate. And I was put on a commission when you're the young lawyer, you get to turn the lights on and off after every meeting. And so I remember going down to the Democratic convention off year in Dover, Delaware. And after the afternoon session, I went back and I was in my room. Just a nice motel you just drive up to, get out, walk in your door there. And you know, an 8x10 bathroom, a shower, and a stall. And I had my towel around me and the shaving cream on my face, and I went bam, bam, bam on my door. And I thought it was the guys that came down with. The guy was had a talk show named Bob Cunningham, was a big civil rights guy, and two others. So I thought of them, and I walked open the door. There was a former governor, former Supreme Court justice, swear to God, the state chairman, and the former congressman. And they said, "We just had dinner." I said, "I'm sorry, gentlemen." I walked in, I ran to the bathroom, was shake the shave grip, thinking I could put something on there with none of the air. I walked back out with a towel. I'm standing against a nail, a desk nail to the wall, and they're on the beds that are nailed to the headboards are nailed to the wall. Four of them sitting across. I said, "Joe, we were thinking you should run for the United States Senate." I said, gentlemen, you serious? And they went on and made their case. I hope all of you had a professor that's enlightened his mind. I had one professor named Dr. Ingersoll, my political philosophy professor, at the University of Delaware, which is between Dover and where I was going home. So I called him and I could stop by and see him. And I said, what do you think I should do? He said, Joe, remember what Plato said. I'm thinking, what the hell did Plato say? Seriously. So Plato said, the penalty good people pay for not being involved in politics is being governed by people worse than themselves. I went home and spoke to my deceased wife. She said, look, Joe, you're working 40 hours a week trying to set up a law firm, and you're working 40 hours a week as a public defender. Get in or get out. Next thing you know, I was running. We won by Nixon won my state by 60% of the vote. We won by a staggering 3,800 votes. My point is, I didn't know what the hell I was doing. But look, and I went on to be able to be, I had to wait a little bit to be sworn in. You got to be 30 to be sworn in. And then I was the vice president, the first African-American president in American history. Now I'm president to our first woman vice president. I've made clear how I feel about Kamala, and she's been an incredible partner to me, a champion of civil rights throughout her career. And she'll continue to be an inspiring leader and project the very idea of America. The very idea that we're all created equal and deserve to be treated equally throughout our lives. We've never fully lived up to that, but we've never walked away from it. We've never walked away because leaders like Lyndon Baines Johnson, my fellow Americans, in 2 years will commemorate the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. That July 4th of 2026 will be a moment not only about our past, but about our future. Imagine that moment and ask yourself, what do we want to be? We can and must be protected and expand our civil rights in America. We can and must prevent the abuse of presidential power and restore faith in the Supreme Court. We can and must strengthen the guardrails of democracy. We must have to remind ourselves who we are. We're the United States of America. And there is nothing beyond our capacity. Nothing when we do it together. So let's stay together, and God bless you all. Lyndon Johnson, Lady Bird Johnson, may God bless the whole family. Ladies and gentlemen, may God protect our troops. Thank you for listening.
Thank you all for joining our live stream as we've been carrying remarks from President Biden. This is his first public appearance since announcing he is not going to seek a second term in office, ending his remarks there by mentioning that he has endorsed his Vice President Kamala Harris to become the next president of the United States. Before that, though, we dove right into a number of reforms that he announced just this very morning. Talking about how he wanted to change some of the things about the Supreme Court. I'm going to bring up a full screen as we're joined here by our digital anchor, Esmeralda Zamora. Esme, I'm going to show you really quickly, everybody at home, what the president is calling for, but just remind us again about what he's exactly saying Congress should do now.
Yeah, he's calling for 3 bold reforms. The first one was a constitutional amendment called the No One is Above the Law Amendment. This one has to do with former President Donald Trump and convictions that he has during his previous term. He also is calling on term limits for Supreme Court justices. He believes Supreme Court justices no longer should have life terms, as well as a binding code of conduct for the Supreme Court.
And you can see right here those 3 proposals. What we heard earlier today is that House Speaker Mike Johnson said these ideas are, quote, dead on arrival. I want to pull up really quickly what he said in response to that, President Biden, I mean. And in his speech, he says, quote, today, I think his thinking is dead on arrival. So it shows that President Biden is wanting to move forward with this in his last 6 months in office. Again, whether or not a divided Congress can push these through, we will have to see. But the head of the Republican Party in the House of Representatives saying that this will not advance very far. As we're listening into that speech, what I thought was interesting was how he got into bringing up these Supreme Court reforms. He mentioned that former President Lyndon Johnson nominated the first black person to become a Supreme Court justice, Thurgood Marshall. And then President Biden dove right into what he thought had been done wrong during more recent Supreme Court times, starting with the 2013 decision in the Shelby County case that gutted the Voting Rights Act, jumping in and mentioning the 2022, the overturning of Roe v. Wade, and then in 2023, the ending affirmative action in the U.S. So that's what he was saying, teeing up his argument to say these are the three arguments and proposals I would like to next tackle. As I mentioned, we will have to see whether or not those will become law or make it very far in D.C. As we're looking live here, we're seeing people still milling about inside the presidential library down at the UT campus for LBJ. And President Biden will be heading back soon to the Austin Bergstrom International Airport. And we know, Esme, that this is not his final stop in Texas today.
Yes, we do know that. He is going to make his way back to the airport from campus and head up to Houston. The reason for his trip to Houston is to pay respects to the late Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. Later this week at around Thursday, Vice President Kamala Harris will also be making her way to Houston, Texas.
Yes, and we will, of course, be still following that. What we saw on Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee's Twitter account a little bit earlier is that she is lying in state today at Houston City Hall. Presumably that's where President Biden will be going once he leaves Austin and heads to Houston. Quickly, I'm going to show another view from some of our crews who are stationed out and about today. Again, we're looking live inside the auditorium at the LBJ Presidential Library and Museum. This is the auditorium where President Biden spoke a little bit earlier, and he's now left the stage, and you can see there's quite a few people still milling about in the crowd there, some of the chairs emptying out just a little bit. But I'm going to bring up a few more live pictures to see what else we can show you. At the moment, let's look at the Texas Department of Transportation camera. This is on I-35 North near 51st Street. A little bit further south from there, we know there will be some road closures because the presidential motorcade will be leaving downtown and heading back to the airport so that President Biden can get on Air Force One and then head to Houston. Let's look at another view really quickly. This is a view that will be showing the airport. Right now it's just showing our live signals slate. Additionally, we are showing you right now inside Houston City Hall where the casket of former Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee is lying in state there, draped in the American flag. People are coming to pay their respects. We are understanding that President Biden is heading there next. If we look live one more time, we'll see what other cameras we can bring you. This one right here is from our crews who are standing and set up right outside the Presidential Library there at the UT campus. Of course, you can see a number of law enforcement vehicles, including Austin Police here in the foreground and some other unmarked vehicles there in the background. The motorcade will be leaving from the library and then heading to the airport. We are anticipating that a number of road closures will be happening, and people can go and check out the traffic map on our website too to find out which routes will be impacted.
Yes, of course. You can visit our website, kxan.com. Right now it is about 4:43 p.m. The president just wrapped up his speech at the campus and plans to get into those vehicles you see on your screen and go towards the airport. Now, if you want to visit our website, we do have a full traffic report constantly being updated there as of the morning when the president made his way to campus, we knew that Highway 71 all the way into Del Valley was completely closed. I-35 in between the university and a little bit more north was completely closed. 183 down to Colton and all the way up to East Austin was completely closed. So we anticipate this to continue and as the president makes his way back to the airport. So please plan accordingly. I know a lot of people are heading out of the office, going into work, going out to do grocery shopping, all that sort. So please be prepared. As you can see on your screens, it looks like it has already begun their trek back to the airport. So these closures are happening pretty soon.
Yeah, our crew again is set up right outside the LBJ Presidential Library there, just right across the street. You can see law enforcement on motorcycles lining up. This is what will kick off the presidential motorcade leaving from downtown and heading back towards the airport. So just because the movement of the motorcycles there, it looks like they are getting ready to leave. Again, some of the officers there don't yet have their helmets on, so we anticipate they'll get those on and then hop on their bikes to be able to head toward the airport and lead that motorcade. But as Esme was mentioning, there is a traffic map available on our website to help you all try to make your way around the city because, this is happening right just before 5 o'clock, rush hour as well in effect, and there might be some even more traffic headaches because of visit and the motorcade leaving. I just want to point out our photographer is resetting his shot. That is for the shaky cam there, and just to give us a better picture. So please be mindful of that. We're showing you again live pictures as this is the news gathering process, trying to get the best shot so that we can show you all exactly what is happening there. But as we mentioned, Esme, the president is going to leave here from Austin, go to Houston, and then is back to D.C. Yes. But we anticipate traffic here in Austin for being pretty backed up for quite a while now as we await the president heading back to the airport.
Yes, and this was his first public announcement, a public speech since the former attempted assassination to former President Donald Trump. So there's a lot of security here, and he is safe for what we know right now.
And again, this is also his first public appearance since withdrawing from the 2024 presidential race. That was a shocking announcement that came after some pretty public pressure from some of his fellow Democrats. We know that Austin Congressman Lloyd Doggett was the first House Democrat to call for his withdrawal from the presidential election, and President Biden ultimately made that decision a week and a day ago. It feels like so much has been lived through just in that time with Vice President Kamala Harris becoming the presidential frontrunner and presumptive nominee for the Democratic Party. She, of course, got President Biden's endorsement for that position, and he spoke kindly of her during the speech at the end of his remarks today. We anticipated that he would make some sort of mention of her, but we also know, Esme, that Kamala Harris will be headed to Texas here as well later this week.
Yes, she plans to make her way to Houston, Texas, Thursday of this week.
Okay. We are going to leave up this live picture for you all just outside the LBJ Presidential Library. The presidential motorcade carrying President Biden back to Austin Bergstrom International Airport should depart relatively soon. Again, stay with us as we continue our coverage of President Biden's visit to Austin.
the security protocols happening here at LBJ.
All right, Jennifer, thank you very much. And I'm joined now by a familiar face for those who watch our morning show. KXAN traffic anchor Erica Brennis joining us now. Erica, it is rush hour in Austin. The president is in town. How are we looking right now?
And the rush hour is always a little bit busier, can be a little bit heavier traffic than in the morning. And that's what we're seeing right now. Here's what we don't know. I'll start there. Exactly what time things will reopen. But what I can tell you right now is our TxDOT camera here at I-35 and 56th Street near Highway 290 off in the distance, those southbound lanes completely shut down as that motorcade makes its way down southbound 35 and over to Highway 71. What TxDOT has done a lot of times during my morning and as I'm tracking traffic, I'm at the mercy of TxDOT being available as far as the cameras that are available out there. And that's what I'm seeing right now. They have all of the TxDOT cameras that might show me this route currently blocked. So that's the best thing I could show you there was that I-35 and 56th Street. Southbound 35 again, completely shut down as the motorcade makes its way. And then you've got eastbound 71 over to the airport also closed. And then what else they've done is 183 in both directions at that intersection of Highway 71 is closed as that motorcade makes its way. We'll be following it. We will let you know when everything is back open, but that traffic impact is significant on I-35, on 71, on 183, and then on Mopac as a lot of people seek an alternate route. Daniel?
All right, Erica, thank you very much. I'm here now with Chief Meteorologist Nick Bannon, and certainly a hot one for the president.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, we basically turned off the rain for the vast majority of us today. There was a little bit out there, but with that rain fading away, high pressure moving overhead, it means that temperatures are way hotter than they were this time yesterday. Let me take you to the maps because there were a few very spotty showers out there, mostly in our eastern counties, but even those showers that were moving through Fayette and Lee counties are almost dried up, and temperatures are now well into the 90s. We're back at 96 in Austin, and that is a full 11 degrees warmer than this time yesterday. And today may end up being the coolest day of the week ahead. So it's only going to get hotter than this over the coming days. Your forecast for tonight, a partly cloudy to eventually mostly cloudy sky as the low clouds build in, and it's going to be a warmer night as overnight lows drop down only to 77. So coming up in first warning weather, here we go. Summer resumes, hot and humid air for days. In fact, we'll track the return of triple-digit heat and eventually some more limited rainfall opportunity.
That's not their fault. That's CenterPoint's leadership's fault.
After widespread power outages left southeast Texans steaming in dangerous heat for days on end, a coalition of Texas lawmakers are looking for some long-awaited answers and a plan for future storms.
And we are live out here at LBJ Library. I am joined by KXAN investigator Kelly Wiley talking about security. We notice a heavy presence from the Secret Service.
That's right. This is President Biden's first public appearance outside of Washington since the assassination attempt on former President Trump. And we talked to lawmakers coming up later in this show on both sides of the aisle who said they have serious concerns about Secret Service, even as they continue to protect the president today at events like this.
All right, Kelly Wiley will have that story and much more live here from LBJ's library in just a moment.
Thomas J. handles.
Thanks everybody for sticking with us here on KXAN Live. Will Dupree back here in the KXAN Live studio with our digital anchor Esmeralda Zamora. Esme, we appreciate you joining us and for sticking with us throughout our continuous coverage today. But where I want to start is, we heard from President Biden, his speech at the LBJ Presidential Library that wrapped up about 30 minutes ago or so. But we're also hearing some reactions from Republicans here in Texas. What have you heard so far as you're looking out on social media and seeing what some of them are saying?
Yeah, so we have a tweeted about, I would say 2 hours ago from the Texas Governor Greg Abbott. He said Joe Biden and Kamala Harris can come all the way to Texas, but not to the border. He said Americans are waiting for them to take this national security crisis seriously, and despite historic levels of illegal crossings, they continue to turn a blind eye to the chaos they created.
Okay, so that is Texas Governor Greg Abbott sharing what is to be an expected reaction, because he's said many of those things publicly before, but of course it's of note since the president is here in Texas at the moment. Let's just go back to his speech really quickly, Esme, too. We know that he had made an announcement this morning talking about some reforms that he would like to see happen with the Supreme Court, and he used this speech today to really highlight those three proposals and talk about some other things. So what stood out to you whenever he was speaking early this afternoon?
Yeah, of course. So what stood out to me most was him speaking about extreme opinions of the Supreme Court undermining the Civil Rights Act that we know today. Some of those included restricting voting acts, overturning Roe v. Wade, of extremely ending affirmative action, an extreme movement agenda called Project 2025 that he did talk about over and over throughout his speech, diversity, equity, and inclusion, extreme MAGA movement, the end of birthrights to American citizenship, the Supreme Court case of Trump versus the U.S., and how it ruled that he has immunity for potential crimes he may have committed while in office. That was part of the 3 bold reforms he plans to restore. Plans to reform, which were obviously a constitutional amendment called the No One Is Above the Law Amendment, term limits for Supreme Court justices, as well as a binding code of conduct for Supreme Court. He did mention that he believes there should be an 18-year term limit for Supreme Court justices and enforceable ethics requirements for the Supreme Court.
During his speech this afternoon, President Biden also addressed criticism since he put out these reforms earlier this morning. House Speaker Mike Johnson apparently told reporters that these proposals are dead on arrival. And during his remarks, President Biden said this: "I think his thinking is dead on arrival." 2 different viewpoints about where this goes there. Obviously, in a divided Congress, there may not be much progress on some of these issues, but of course we'll have to wait and see. The president is certainly committed to that, but perhaps Republicans will stand against that and block them from ever taking effect. We've been showing some live pictures as well, letting people know that the presidential motorcade is still going to make its way toward the Austin airport. And President Biden, Esme, is set to travel somewhere else here in Texas. Where is that?
Yes, he is set to travel as soon as he gets back to the Austin airport to Houston, Texas. He plans to go to Houston and pay his respects to the late Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. Her viewing will continue into today until 7 p.m. He has just a few hours to get there, to be there, and to remember her legacy. And our Vice President Kamala Harris plans on getting there on Thursday of this week as well.
Yeah, and Kamala Harris, we should mention, received some kind words during the end of President Biden's remarks. Of course, he has endorsed her for president now since he is not running for re-election. This was what he said. He said about Kamala Harris, quote, "She's been an incredible partner to me," and he went on to say she will continue to be an inspiring leader. Touching on quite a bit of the history, though, that's happened in the last 2 weeks. So much to touch on there, but we appreciate all of you so much for joining us here during this continuous live stream since President Biden landed just before 3 o'clock or so this afternoon through his remarks, and as we await his motorcade to make its way to the airport and him to fly to Houston. A lot of you out there are still dealing with road closures at this point because of the safety aspects of traveling. I just want to point you really quickly on that southbound lanes of I-35, which run right there next to the UT campus. There is no traffic flowing at all. Thinking about 5:15 on a Monday evening, that is normally packed with cars.
So rare sight to see.
Incredibly rare to see. It's just amazing to see what effort has gone to make sure that the president can be able to get to the airport quickly. That, of course, the roads will open whenever his motorcade clears out and makes its way further south and over on 71 to the airport. That's where Air Force One is parked at the moment and waiting for the president to board again so that he can head to Houston. Esme, thank you again for being with us through this live stream. We appreciate it so very much, and for providing that little brief update about what President Biden spoke about this afternoon. So thank you again. We appreciate it.
Yes, thank you so much for having me, and thanks to everybody for staying with us throughout the entire live. Remember, we'll have the rest of this coverage on our website, KXAN Live.
We will send you there. That is Esmeralda Zamora. I'm Will Dupree. We will see you back here at another time. Hope you all enjoy the rest of your evening. Please stay patient out there with the roads the way they are, and we'll see you again soon. Take care.